In 1877, Reconstruction officially ended. African American congressmen made commendable efforts to fight for Reconstruction legislation to ensure black rights in the former Confederate states and legislation to benefit the poor, both black and white. Southern whites became resentful of the gains made by the former slaves during this period. Whites became nostalgic for the pre-Civil War South. This nostalgia led to the creation of the Ku Klux Klan.
Klan actually develops in 1867 in Pulaski, Tennessee. Starts out as a social club of former Confederates. You could say that the late 19th century is the age of joining, of people being in clubs, but it starts out as a social club. One of the early leaders was, of course, Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was one of the grand wizards of the Klan, the first grand wizard probably of the Klan. Before the Civil War, he was a slave trader in Memphis. During the Civil War, he was a cavalry general, natural cavalry commander or whatever, and never went to West Point, any of this.
One of the most horrible incidents in the Civil War happened 1863. They called it the Fort Pillow Massacre. And the founder of the Ku Klux Klan at the time, Nathan Bedford Forrest, he founded the Klan in 1967. He was a Confederate general. And there was a fight between a Confederate regiment and a black regiment, and about 250 of the black soldiers surrendered. They came out with their hands up, and according to the rules of war, when someone has surrendered, that's it. You just take them to the prison or the camp, and that's it. But what they did instead was that they shot about 250, 260 of these soldiers in cold blood. And that's the Fort Pillow Massacre, right? And after that, the rallying cry black soldiers would use would be "Remember Fort Pillow," when again 260 of them had been killed in cold blood. Now, Hattiesburg, the county, there's a county in Mississippi called Forest County. That's where the University of Southern Mississippi is at. And in the city of Memphis and the city of Nashville, they have big statues of Nathan Bedford Forrest. So, and one of those statues just erected 5 years ago. So in the white community, it seems like there's sort of an effort to revive the legacy of Nathan Bedford Forrest.
I guess if you're driving around in Memphis, then you'll probably see the statue to Nathan Bedford Forrest, which is still there, downtown Memphis.
No time to not look up and look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. I wish I was in the land of cotton. No time to not look up and look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. Then I wish I was in Dixie, hooray, hooray, in Dixieland.
The Klan starts out as this social club, you could say, dedicated to preserving Anglo-Saxon or white culture and values, maybe dedicated to preserving this image of the pre-Civil War South as they imagined it to be. And what they see themselves up against in the post-Civil War period is the growing influence of African Americans, joining together with whites who have come down, carpetbaggers as they would call them, who come down to kind of help the Freedmen's Bureau or bring the schools down, the missionary societies that have come in. They see these groups as bringing a different influence into the South, a negative influence in the South. And they feel that the way that you can keep this influence from coming to the forefront or gaining power is to use violence, or to be willing to use violence. And the violence, of course, escalates, and there are lynchings, there are rapes, there are beatings of anyone, black or white, who challenges the system, the old system. So that I think we're familiar with blacks who have been brutalized or are brutalized by the Klan. But I think you would also, if you look through the whole tradition of these lynchings and the violence, you'd also find that there were whites who were also victims of Klan violence, either because they associated with or supported blacks, they were teachers or whatever of blacks in probably rural neighborhoods, because I think the Klan would tend to function more where you had a minority of blacks than where you had a large majority of blacks. That was basically how the Klan operated. The federal government, of course, as a part of this Reconstruction, eventually passes legislation, Klan acts, to try to suppress the Klan. They eventually are successful to a certain extent. The Klan kind of goes underground. Lynching continues, but the Klan goes underground. Then in the 1920s, you have the resurrection of the Klan, but it's a different Klan. And this new Klan is not only anti-black, this new Klan is anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic, anti-everything, anything that is not white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. So I think probably if you're talking about the Klan, it's kind of the Klan at different periods in American history. And I guess if we're trying to figure out why it emerges at these periods, probably we could say it's at times when whites feel threatened, and it could be a physical threat, it could be an economic threat, it could be in the 1920s a threat that's presented not just simply by African Americans, but by a growing number of immigrants who have come into the country in the late 19th and early 20th century. That's a part of the Klan. And the Klan in the 1920s was so strong that it parades down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. in full Klan regalia. And people are not outraged, they're not surprised, it's just, the Klan. It was a family organization. Women and children joined the Klan. Lynchings could sometimes be family celebrations or whatever, where you'd have women and children there participating or whatever. So it's that's basically what the Klan was. And of course, it's suppressed again, and then it comes back periodically in different forms. So I don't think there's a single strand of the Klan all the way through. It's just this organization that emerges and dies down, then comes back again. Economic hard times might produce the Klan again, may produce kind of a clone of the Klan, just a different, calling itself the Klan, but not really being the Klan. I'm sure that the Klan is around today. I mean, wearing business suits, but they're probably still around.
We had two KKKs. First KKK was established in Pulaski, Tennessee, 1866, right after the Civil War during the beginnings of Reconstruction. And it originally started off as just a white social organization for white males. And they generally drank together, sort of like a fraternal organization. They drank together, played cards together. And they did a lot of practical jokes together. They might go scare black people, put on a mask and go scare black people. But over time, they became more and more terroristic in their activities, and they became, in many ways, sort of the what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of the defender of the white South, and they became also the security arm of the Democratic Party. In 1867, the Ku Klux Klan in many southern states was basically the main operation was to prevent blacks from voting. They killed a whole host of number of black politicians during the Reconstruction era, and they prevented thousands more from voting during the Reconstruction period. So that was sort of the first Klan. Now the second Klan in the 1920s would have its base in Indiana. And by 1925, Michigan and Indiana were had the most Klansmen per capita of any other state in the Union. Now the second Klan was somewhat more different. They were mainly against Jews, Catholics, immigrants, and things of that nature. Now if you look at some Klan literature in the 1920s, it won't say anything about black folk. That was just a given. That was just a given. They didn't have to waste ink on that. So you have two different Klans, but the second Klan was nowhere near as violent as the first Klan.
The Klan was those white people who didn't want to see African Americans progressing toward equality and freedom, and through terroristic methods tried to suppress African Americans. And there have been really three waves, well, now you can say four waves of Klan in the United States. The first one really happened around Reconstruction, and that, as I mentioned, was a reaction to Reconstruction. And it involved a lot of former military people, were members of the first Klan, a lot of the Confederate soldiers, but also a lot of the poor whites, as a way to uphold their racial privilege, became Klan members. And they were just a terroristic group. I mean, they during Reconstruction they would attack black office holders. They would disrupt black churches. If black farmers seemed to be uppity, seeming to making a little bit of money, and buying a few horses and or wagon or something, attack them for being out of their place. I mean, they were a terroristic group. There's nothing more to say about it. I mean, that's what they did. They did die down some after Reconstruction. And then they did come back again in the 1880s and 1890s. They're revived. There's a revival of the Klan then. And again, and I think it's revived because, again, of African American agency. There's no need for them if African Americans are getting these happy darkies. But African Americans aren't. African Americans are doing and accomplishing things, and therefore posing a threat. And so the Klan is revived to suppress that threat. Also, the Klan is revived. There's also another threat, though, that enters in this later time period, and that's the threat from Southern and Eastern European immigrants to the United States. And it really is, in a sense, the people who were at the basis of the white supremacy movement, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, are really being threatened, on the one hand, by African Americans, but also being threatened now by these Southern and Eastern Europeans, some of whom were also Jews, and they were religiously being threatened by that. So the second Klan is even larger in scope, in a sense. It's not just targeted against African Americans. And of course, the Klan gets a great facelift with the picture Birth of a Nation, which, of course, is a famous movie directed by D.W. Griffith. That's, in quotes, supposedly showed an image of what had happened during Reconstruction. And indeed, for many people, the Birth of a Nation became the history of Reconstruction. And what the Birth of a Nation showed was, first of all, it showed black people taking over these Reconstruction governments. Yet we need to remember that in not one state were African Americans actually in control of the state government. There was no black governor during Reconstruction. It was always white governors. And in fact, Douglas Wilder, just recently of Virginia, has been the first and only black governor ever in the United States. But again, in Birth of a Nation, they have this image of black people, again, this black hordes taking over the government. The other image, the strong image that comes out of Birth of a Nation, is the corruption. That these black politicians are just skimming the money from these states and are being frivolous and just throwing the money away on wine, women, and song. And of course, what that's a reaction to is we need to remember that after the Civil War, the South had no basic institutions. They didn't have a school system. They didn't have a hospital system. They didn't have basically a railroad system. And that indeed these Reconstruction governments did have to, or sanitation systems. And these Reconstruction governments did have to spend lots of money to get these basic things functioning again. And there were lots of complaints because these planners were some of the people who had now to pay these taxes. Because they had controlled the legislatures before and saw that the South never got internal improvements. The Reconstruction governments tried to make internal improvements, and these planners reacted to it. So the Birth of a Nation, and the other thing that Birth of a Nation showed was black people, in quotes, too quickly reaching for equality, and particularly for equality when it came to interracial relations between black men and white women, which was really it was sort of they would never show the kind of sex scene we would have in a movie today, but they didn't have to. A black man touching a white woman, that was lynching. That was the ultimate crime right there. And indeed, it shows, Birth of a Nation shows in one scene where this woman commits suicide because she's been sullied by the touch of a black man. And indeed, so for many people, remember, movies were a whole new phenomenon, and people didn't know that they were made up. And many people felt that was history. that they had somehow gone back to the past, recorded what had happened, and that's what was in quotes the truth. And then, of course, the movie received a great endorsement of Woodrow Wilson, who said that indeed it was like history writ with lightning, which seemed to confirm that it was an accurate portrayal of Reconstruction. But of course we have to remember what kind of president and who Woodrow Wilson was. Woodrow Wilson was a Southerner, although he had been a former president and governor of New Jersey, president of Princeton, later governor of New Jersey. He was a Southerner and he had Southern views. And indeed, while he's in the White House, he segregates Washington D.C. he segregates the federal government. He in the Treasury, in the Post Office, he segregates them. They had been operating on a more or less equal basis, and he moved he introduces segregation to the federal government, all under the name of progressivism. But it really was, as a former advisor of mine said, it really was a progressivism for whites only.
Wilson's brand of progressivism permeated many facets of American life during the early 1900s. The negative images of African Americans were a fixture in society at that time. Dr. Jacqueline Stewart talks about how those negative images were depicted in early film.
A lot of people, when they talk about early black images in film, will talk about the year 1896, because that was the year of Plessy versus Ferguson, which legalized segregation in American society. And it was also the first year of film exhibition. And so when people think about the very first film being exhibited to audiences, you can't separate that from the social conditions of segregation in American life and culture. And so the very earliest black images in film are pretty much what you would expect them to be, really racist depictions of people stealing watermelons and chickens and real short comedy kinds of things. And lots of times the black characters are actually played by white actors wearing blackface makeup taken directly from the minstrel stage. And so for the first few decades of film production, that's the kind of black representation that predominates, white actors pretending to be some kind of caricature of what black people are supposed to be. And probably the film that people are most familiar with using this device is D.W. Griffith's film, The Birth of a Nation, which was released in 1915. It was based on a book called The Klansman by a writer named Thomas Dixon, who was a vicious racist. And he was participating in a really lively debate about what are we going to do about the Negro in American society. And the book is really vicious in its representation of what happened after the Civil War, this fear of black people coming into some kind of political power and crushing the white South under the heel of the black South. And tries to offer a vision of America, of the white North and the white South coming together precisely to get rid of any kind of black threat. And so when D.W. Griffith, who was already a pretty prominent filmmaker, he had made hundreds of films for the Biograph Company prior to making The Birth of a Nation, he chose this as the project that would be his epic project. When it was made, it was the longest film that had ever been made in America. It was preceded by an unprecedented publicity campaign. The book had already been translated to the stage. There had been pageants and parades based on the Klansman. And when it was revealed that a film version was going to be made, the black communities were in an uproar about what this would mean to the sort of general white conception of what black character was about. But even though lots of different branches of the NAACP tried to block the film, they couldn't really stop it. It became a real national and international sensation. As I said, it was extremely long, and it was a really romantic vision of the Civil War and what would need to happen to subjugate this troubling African presence in America. Some of the scenes that people, I guess, know the best are the rape scene, the so-called rape scene, in which a black male character named Gus, who is supposed to be a soldier for the North, comes back to the South and wants to marry a white woman. And he chases this young white woman around. And even though he doesn't actually rape her because she throws herself over the side of a cliff before he can actually get his hands on her, it's still read as a rape scene. And what happens in the film is that the brother of this young woman is so outraged about her death and this perceived attack by a black man that he forms the Ku Klux Klan. And the Klan rides to the rescue of some other white people at the end of the movie. It's all tied to these fears about black power and black sexuality. And these were the kinds of scenes that the NAACP found to be very offensive. There's also a really important sequence in which we see how so many African Americans were elected to Southern legislatures right after the Civil War. This was supposed to be an indication of what would happen if black people could actually vote. They'd vote themselves into office. So there's a scene that's preceded by a little title that says that all of the things you're about to see are based on historical records and like notations of books where these legitimate facts come from. And then you see real black people, not white actors in blackface, but some actual African American actors sitting in the legislature. They're drinking, liquor underneath their desks. They're eating fried chicken. They're taking their shoes off. And the first thing they do is they pass legislation for interracial marriage. So this concept that this is the dream that African American men have, that assimilating into American culture means marrying and having sexual relations with white women, was really the basis for a lot of the protests against the film, because it was its claims to have a certain kind of historical reality that people were most offended about. It didn't just pretend to be fiction, it pretended to be a slice of American history. And people knew that that wasn't because audiences would believe what they saw at the movies, and that was the real concern. So The Birth of a Nation still inspires a lot of controversy for obvious reasons. In terms of like contemporary film studies, the problem with The Birth of a Nation is that it is a film that is extremely important in terms of the formal development of the medium of filmmaking. It uses editing techniques and close-ups and elaborate sets and does things that had never been done to such great effect before. And so for decades, people have taught that film and all of its formal innovations to say, look at this model of American filmmaking, and D.W. Griffith is the father of American cinema. But then, how can you not talk about the movie's racial politics? It seems to me it would be impossible to separate the two, but I've heard many film scholars complain and students complain that they first learned about this film just in terms of its formal qualities and didn't hear any discussion about its politics. But then that goes the other way too. I know a lot of black film classes start off with this film just to set it up as a foil for everything that comes after. But you really have to deal with it as a complicated text that is really offensive, but it uses close-ups in a way that no other filmmaker had used close-ups before. Film students need to see that too. So I think it's a film people need to know about and actually need to see, because I think people have a lot of conceptions about it, but they don't really know what it's about.